You're never going to change, Emma. Jake's voice echoed through the room, each word sharp and biting. The words were like daggers, cutting through the air as the dinner party came to an abrupt halt. His eyes narrowed in disgust, and he took a slow sip of his wine, savoring the moment. The guests watched, unsure whether they should intervene or just remain silent. But Emma, his wife, didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She simply looked up at him, the faintest smile curling at the corners of her lips. I don't need to change for you, Jake, she replied softly, her voice steady, unwavering. The words hung in the air, like a challenge he wasn't expecting. Jake stared at her, disbelief flashing across his face. He was the successful CEO, the one with the power. She was just the woman he married, ordinary in his eyes. To him, her weight was a weakness, a flaw that defined her. She wasn't worth much more than the extravagant parties and luxury that surrounded them. But Emma wasn't looking for validation. Not from him, not from anyone. She knew her worth. And in that moment, she decided she would show him just how wrong he was. A month passed. The tension between them lingered, but Emma didn't care. She focused on herself, her health, her goals. She wasn't doing this for Jake. She wasn't even doing this for the world. She was doing it for herself. Her posts began to flood social media, pictures of her progress, her transformation. Each step she took was a step toward regaining control over her life. Slowly, people started noticing. They started commenting, encouraging her, applauding her for her determination. It wasn't easy. Every day was a challenge. But Emma pushed through, every day proving to herself that she could overcome the negativity that had surrounded her for years. Meanwhile, Jake, oblivious to her quiet strength, continued to live in his bubble of arrogance and privilege. He couldn't see the transformation happening right before his eyes. He mocked her, belittled her, never realizing that he was only fueling her resolve. Then came the day when everything changed. Emma's latest post hit like a bombshell. It wasn't just her physical transformation that took people by surprise. It was the confidence, the energy she exuded. She was glowing, happier than ever before. Jake saw it too, and for the first time, he couldn't ignore it. As he scrolled through his social media feed, his eyes stopped on her latest photo. He stared at the screen, his stomach sinking as he realized what had been happening. What the hell, he muttered, his fingers shaking as he zoomed in on the image. Emma, the woman he had mocked, was now someone he couldn't recognize. She wasn't just different physically, she was powerful. And in that moment, he knew he had underestimated her. But by then, it was too late. People had already seen the change. They were already rallying behind her. And Jake? He was left wondering how he could have been so wrong about the woman he married. Emma had done more than just transform her body. She had transformed herself into someone who no longer needed his approval. She was now a woman who could stand tall, no matter what he said. The comments flooded in, praising her strength and resilience. Jake, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel the weight of his own ignorance. He had never seen it coming. And now, he had to live with the consequences. The next few weeks felt like a slow burn for Jake. He could no longer ignore the whispers, the comments, and the constant reminders of Emma's transformation. At first, he tried to brush it off, telling himself that she was just following some fad. But every time he scrolled through his feed, there she was, Emma, glowing, confident, strong. She wasn't just posting pictures of her weight loss. She was posting about her achievements, her newfound confidence, and her happiness. The woman he once ridiculed was now becoming an inspiration to many. He couldn't handle it. His pride was shattered, and he couldn't admit it. He'd always been the center of attention, the one who held the power, the one who made the rules. But now, all of that was slipping away. Emma had quietly taken control of her own life, and it was more than Jake could bear. One evening, Jake sat in his office, scrolling through social media, when he saw a post from one of his business associates. It was a photo of Emma standing on a stage, receiving an award for her dedication to health and wellness. The caption read, "Emma Harris is a true inspiration to all of us. Proof that hard work and determination can change lives." Jake stared at the image, his heart sinking. He couldn't believe it. His wife, the woman he had mocked, was now being praised by the very people he once called his peers. He tried to ignore the nagging feeling in his gut, but it was impossible. Emma was no longer the woman he controlled. She had become someone else, someone better. He couldn't remember the last time he saw her smile the way she did now. He didn't know how to feel about it. There was a part of him that was proud of her, but it was buried deep beneath a layer of jealousy and insecurity. He wanted to tell her how sorry he was, how much he regretted the things he'd said. But something held him back. Maybe it was his pride. Maybe it was the fear of admitting he was wrong. The next morning, Emma walked into the kitchen, her face lit up with the same glow that had been radiating from her social media posts. She made herself a cup of coffee, and Jake sat at the table, staring at her. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Jake hesitated. He wanted to apologize, to tell her how much he admired her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just shook his head. Emma smiled softly, a knowing smile. She had already seen it in his eyes. She knew. "It's all right, Jake," she said quietly. "You don't have to say anything. I've already forgiven you. But I want you to know something. I didn't do this for you. I didn't do this for anyone but myself." Her words cut through him, sharp and honest. He wanted to respond, to explain himself, but he knew deep down that he didn't have the right. He had underestimated her for far too long. And now, Emma was no longer the woman he could control. She was the woman he had to learn to respect. Weeks passed, and while Jake tried to ignore it, Emma's transformation continued to ripple through every part of his life. At work, people were talking about her. At social gatherings, she was no longer the background figure she once was. Emma had become the topic of admiration, the very person Jake had once mocked. He couldn't escape it. Every time he opened his social media, her face was there, smiling, radiating confidence, and living a life he couldn't control. It was maddening. The worst part was that he couldn't confront her about it. He didn't know how. Instead, he sat in silence, watching her change, watching her grow, and feeling like he was being left behind. One evening, Jake decided to attend a charity event, hoping to get away from the constant reminders of Emma's success. But even there, he couldn't escape her influence. As he entered the ballroom, he overheard a conversation between two of his colleagues. "Did you see Emma's latest post?" one of them asked. "She's really something, isn't she? I can't believe how far she's come." Jake clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on his drink. It was like a punch in the gut. They were talking about his wife. The woman he had once ridiculed. The woman who now seemed more powerful than ever. He tried to change the subject, but the words stung, and he couldn't shake the feeling of shame that crept over him. Later that night, he found himself back at home, pacing around the living room, unable to sleep. He looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m., but he couldn't stop his mind from racing. He had to talk to her. He had to apologize. But something inside him was still holding him back. Emma had never been the kind of woman who sought revenge. She was strong in ways he hadn't understood until now. And as he stood there in the quiet of the night, he realized how much he had underestimated her. The next day, Jake walked into the kitchen, where Emma was making breakfast. She looked up at him, her eyes steady and calm, as if she had been waiting for this moment. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. Emma turned back to the stove, flipping the pancakes with ease. "What is it, Jake?" she asked, her voice soft but direct. He swallowed hard, taking a deep breath. "I've been thinking about everything," he said slowly. "I know I hurt you. I know I didn't respect you the way I should have." Emma didn't respond right away. She simply finished what she was doing and placed the plate of pancakes on the table. Then, she sat down across from him, her expression unreadable. Jake could feel his heart pounding in his chest. "I've seen how much you've changed," he continued. "And it's hard for me to admit, but I'm proud of you. I was wrong about you, Emma. I always thought I was the one in control, but now I see that I never was." Emma remained silent, watching him. For a moment, Jake felt like he was drowning in the weight of his own words. Then, finally, Emma spoke. "I didn't do this for you, Jake," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I did it for me. And I'm glad you're seeing it now, but I've already moved on from the person I used to be. I'm not waiting for your approval anymore." Her words hung in the air, clear and firm. Jake felt a lump form in his throat. He had always believed that control was power, but now, in front of him, Emma had proven that true strength came from within. And in that moment, Jake understood what he had to do: stop trying to control everything and learn to respect the woman sitting in front of him. Emma had taken back her power, and he had no choice but to recognize it. Days passed since their conversation in the kitchen, and Jake couldn't shake the weight of Emma's words. It wasn't just about losing control anymore, it was about realizing the woman he had taken for granted had been quietly building something far more powerful than he had ever understood. Emma wasn't just transforming physically, she was evolving emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And every step of her journey was one that Jake hadn't been a part of until now. He spent his days thinking about how he could repair the damage he had caused, but it wasn't as simple as saying sorry. The silence between them was growing louder, the distance between them more noticeable. Emma had found her peace, and he was still fighting with his own pride. One evening, Jake decided to make things right. He had a plan, one that he knew would show Emma he understood just how wrong he had been. The next morning, he took the day off work, something he rarely did. He went to the store and bought a small, simple bouquet of flowers, nothing extravagant, just something that said he was trying. He had never been great at expressing emotions. But he knew this was something he had to do. When he walked through the door, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, reading. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. Then, he walked over, placed the flowers in front of her, and sat down. Emma looked up at him, her expression calm but curious. "I thought I'd get you something," Jake said quietly, his voice unsure. "Something to show you that I've been thinking about what you said." Emma didn't speak at first. She just looked at the flowers and then back at Jake. There was no anger in her eyes, no frustration. Just a quiet acceptance. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady. "But you don't need to apologize, Jake. I told you, I didn't do any of this for you. I did it for me." Jake felt a lump form in his throat. He knew she was right. She didn't need his validation anymore. She had found something within herself that he had never been able to give her. It was a truth he had to accept. But that didn't mean he couldn't try to be better. "I know you didn't," he said quietly. "But I need you to know that I see you now. I see who you are, and I'm sorry for all the times I made you feel less than. I was wrong, and I want to be a better person, not just for you, but for myself too." Emma studied him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. Then, she nodded. "I can't change the past, Jake," she said. "But I'm glad you're seeing things differently. I've moved forward. And I hope, one day, you can too." Jake swallowed hard. He knew she wasn't asking for anything more from him. She wasn't waiting for him to be perfect. She just wanted him to acknowledge the truth, to see her for who she had always been. And, for the first time in a long while, Jake realized that he had been blind to the most important thing in his life, Emma's strength. He didn't need to fix everything, and he didn't need to control everything. All he had to do was let go and truly see her. That realization was more powerful than any apology. Emma wasn't just the woman who had been in his life for years, she was the woman who had always been strong enough to stand on her own, even when he couldn't see it. Over the next few months, Jake found himself adjusting to a new reality. He was no longer the center of attention at home. Emma had taken charge of her own life, and while they still shared a home, there was an unspoken understanding between them. She was no longer waiting for his approval, and he was no longer the man who would dictate her worth. It was a shift that was both uncomfortable and enlightening for him. He began to notice the small changes in their daily interactions. Emma was more present, more confident, and far more independent than he had ever given her credit for. The house, once filled with tension, now had a calmness to it. Jake no longer felt the need to be the loudest voice in the room. Emma had her own life, her own passions, and Jake had come to realize that she was thriving in ways he had never imagined. One evening, Emma invited him to dinner at the restaurant where she had spent so much time and energy working on her fitness and wellness journey. It was a small, cozy place, nothing too fancy, but it felt like a world away from the grand dinners Jake was used to. As they sat across from each other, sharing a quiet meal, Emma spoke about her future plans. "I've been thinking about opening a wellness center," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "A place where people can learn to take care of themselves, not just physically but mentally too. I want to help others find the peace I've found." Jake was stunned. He had always seen Emma as the quiet, supportive wife, the one who stayed in the background while he took center stage. But now, he was hearing her talk about something entirely different, something that was hers and hers alone. He realized how much he had missed in the past, how much he had overlooked. "That's amazing," Jake said, his voice full of sincerity. "I think you'll do great." Emma smiled at him, her eyes softening. "Thanks, Jake. But it's not about doing great for anyone else. It's about doing great for myself." Jake nodded, his mind racing. He had spent so long trying to control everything, trying to make his life work on his terms. But now, he saw that Emma had been quietly building a life of her own, one that didn't rely on his approval or validation. She had found a way to shine without him. It was both humbling and inspiring. As they finished their meal, Emma reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "I'm not the same person I was before, Jake," she said quietly. "And I don't expect you to be either. But I want you to know that I'm proud of the change I've made. I found my voice, and I'm not going to lose it again." Jake sat there in silence, feeling a mixture of guilt and awe. He had underestimated her for so long, and now, he saw the woman who had been right in front of him all along. She was more than just his wife, she was a force of her own. And for the first time, Jake understood that he didn't need to control her to love her. He didn't need to be the one to make things happen. Emma was more than capable of shaping her own future, and he was lucky to be a part of it. As they walked out of the restaurant together, Jake felt a new sense of respect for the woman at his side. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the future, and for the first time in a long while, Jake felt like he was truly walking beside Emma, not in front of her. It had been 6 months since that dinner at the restaurant, and things between Jake and Emma had shifted in ways he never imagined. Jake had done the work. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, learning how to be a better husband, a better man. He was actively involved in Emma's new wellness center, not because he felt obligated, but because he genuinely wanted to support her. The center was growing, and Emma was flourishing, more confident and driven than ever. She had found her true calling, and it was clear to Jake that this wasn't just a job for her, it was her passion. They were sitting together one evening in their living room, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. Emma was on her laptop, scrolling through plans for upcoming wellness retreats. Jake watched her for a moment before he spoke. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. Emma looked up from her laptop, raising an eyebrow. "About what?" she asked. "About how much I've missed," Jake admitted. "I've missed the small things. The way you smile when you talk about something that excites you, the way you challenge me to see things differently. I didn't appreciate those things before." Emma smiled softly, the kind of smile that made her eyes shine. "You know, Jake," she said, "I used to think I needed your approval for everything. For my dreams, for my choices. But I've realized that I don't need anyone's approval but my own." Jake nodded, the weight of her words settling on him. He had seen her change, but now he understood it wasn't just about her appearance or her success, it was about her self-worth. She had always been strong, but now she had learned to embrace that strength fully. "I know I've been hard on you in the past," Jake continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been selfish, focused on what I wanted, and I didn't see you for who you truly are. But I see it now. I see the person you've always been, the person I never fully appreciated until now." Emma's smile deepened. She didn't need to hear those words to validate her anymore, but hearing them from Jake meant something. It meant they were moving forward together. "I'm glad you see me now," Emma said quietly. "But I don't need you to apologize. I just want you to keep showing up. Keep growing, just like I am." Jake sat in silence for a moment, feeling a deep sense of peace. This wasn't about grand gestures or making up for lost time. It was about understanding, respect, and mutual growth. They didn't need to be perfect. They just needed to be real. Later that evening, as they sat together on the couch, Jake reached over and took her hand in his. "I've learned a lot from you, Emma," he said softly. "Not just about life, but about love. And I promise, I'll never take you for granted again." Emma squeezed his hand gently, her eyes warm with affection. "And I'll never stop growing, Jake," she replied, "because I'm not the same woman I was when we started this journey. And neither are you." For the first time in a long while, Jake felt truly at peace. He didn't need to control or fix everything. He just needed to be by her side, supporting her, learning from her, and growing with her. They had both changed, but together, they were stronger than ever. It had been almost a year since Jake and Emma had begun their journey of change, both as individuals and as a couple. Their lives were no longer dominated by the tension and distance that had once separated them. Jake had continued his efforts, not out of obligation, but because he had come to truly respect the woman Emma had become. Emma, for her part, was more focused than ever on her wellness center, helping others transform their lives while keeping her own grounded in purpose. The center had become a community, a place where people not only worked on their physical health but found the emotional and mental tools to create lasting change. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Emma and Jake sat on the porch, the warm evening breeze cooling the air. They were quiet for a while, simply enjoying each other's presence. Jake was the first to break the silence. "I was thinking about how far we've come," he said, his voice soft but full of gratitude. Emma glanced at him, her face calm, but there was a spark in her eyes. "We've come a long way," she agreed. "But I think the best part is that we've grown together." Jake smiled, his eyes searching hers. "Yeah, I never thought I'd be able to say that. I used to think I had to do everything on my own, that I needed to be in control of everything. But now, I know it's about trusting each other." Emma's smile deepened, and she reached out to take his hand. "Trust is the foundation," she said. "Without it, nothing lasts. But I don't think we would have gotten here if we hadn't both made the decision to change." Jake squeezed her hand gently, his heart full of emotion. "I never thought I'd change. I always thought I was the one who knew what was best, but I see now that it wasn't about being right. It was about being willing to grow. You've taught me that." Emma looked at him, her expression warm. "You've taught me, too. You've shown me that I don't need to prove myself to anyone. I am enough just as I am." Jake nodded, his throat tightening with the weight of her words. "I think that's the hardest lesson I've learned. It's not about changing to fit someone else's idea of who you should be. It's about embracing who you are, flaws and all." They sat there for a while longer, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The evening felt peaceful, like a new chapter was unfolding for them both. Jake knew that their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, he wasn't trying to control or fix anything. He was simply here, in this moment, with the woman he had learned to respect and love in ways he never thought possible. Emma looked at him and smiled, her heart full of gratitude for how far they had come. "We've come a long way, Jake," she said softly, "but I think we're just getting started." Jake smiled back, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together, with trust, love, and the knowledge that they were stronger as a team than they had ever been apart. Months went by, and as the seasons changed, so did Emma and Jake's life together. They had grown into a rhythm, not just as partners in their relationship, but as partners in life. The wellness center was thriving more than Emma had ever hoped for. People were coming in droves, eager to change their lives just as she had. She was no longer just a symbol of strength, she was a beacon of hope for those looking to transform. Jake, too, had embraced his role, not just as her husband, but as an active supporter of her vision. He handled the business side of things, making sure everything ran smoothly, while Emma continued to lead with passion and compassion. But it wasn't just their work that was flourishing, their relationship had taken on a new depth. They were no longer two people in a marriage trying to navigate their way through the world. They were a team, united by their shared journey of growth. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting a warm light around the room, Emma looked at Jake and smiled. "You know," she said, "I never imagined this life for us. I thought it would always be about survival, about getting by. But now, it feels like we're thriving." Jake glanced over at her, his eyes softening. "We are thriving," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "And it's not just the center. It's us. It's how far we've come, how much we've changed." Emma's smile deepened. "It's funny," she said thoughtfully. "I used to think that if I changed, it would mean I wasn't good enough as I was. But now I see that changing was the only way I could truly find myself. And I'm not just talking about losing weight or getting fit. I'm talking about finding my voice, finding my purpose." Jake nodded, his heart full of admiration. He had watched her go from being unsure of herself, constantly seeking approval, to someone who owned her worth. She had stepped into her power, and he couldn't have been prouder. "I'm glad you found your voice," Jake said, "because I think it's given me the courage to find mine too." Emma reached out, placing her hand on his. "We're both still learning," she said softly, "but I think the most important lesson is that we're never done growing. We don't stop because we've reached some finish line. We stop when we stop believing we can keep improving." Jake held her hand tightly, his eyes meeting hers. "I agree," he said. "And I want to keep growing with you, Emma. I want to keep being the person you deserve, the person you've helped me become." Emma squeezed his hand in return, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "We're already there," she said quietly. "We've already become who we were meant to be. Together." As they sat there, wrapped in the warmth of their love and the peace of their shared growth, they both knew that this was just the beginning. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they were no longer afraid. They had each other, and together, they were unstoppable. As the months passed, Emma's wellness center continued to grow, becoming a place of transformation for many. The small studio she had started with a vision was now a thriving community hub where people of all backgrounds came to not only improve their physical health but to rebuild their lives. It was more than just a business, it was a mission, a purpose. Jake stood beside her, supporting her every step of the way. The woman who had once struggled with her self-worth was now a leader, inspiring others to find their own strength. It was a far cry from the man who had once dismissed her, and Jake couldn't help but marvel at how far they had both come. Their home, once filled with tension and unspoken resentment, was now a place of peace. They had learned to communicate, to support each other, and to grow together. It wasn't always easy, but their bond had never been stronger. One afternoon, after a particularly busy day at the center, Emma and Jake sat on their porch, watching the sunset. The golden light washed over them, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Emma turned to Jake, her face soft and content. "You know, I was thinking," she said, her voice calm. "When I first started this journey, I thought it was about changing my body, getting healthier. But it's so much more than that. It's about changing how I see myself, how I show up in the world." Jake smiled, his heart full of admiration for the woman beside him. "I know," he said quietly. "I've watched you grow in ways I never expected. You've become this amazing person, and I'm proud of you, Emma." Emma reached over and took his hand, her touch gentle. "We've both grown," she said softly. "I've learned to trust myself, and you've learned to see me for who I really am. That's the real change." Jake nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't just Emma who had changed. He had changed too. He had learned to let go of his need to control, to allow her to shine in her own right. They had both come a long way, but the journey wasn't over. There was still so much ahead of them. Emma squeezed his hand and looked at him, her eyes shining with a quiet determination. "There's still so much I want to do," she said. "And I want you by my side as I do it." Jake felt a swell of emotion in his chest. "Always," he said simply, his voice steady. They sat in silence for a while, just enjoying the peace they had found together. It was the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable but filled with understanding, the kind that only comes when two people truly see each other. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger than ever before. As the days turned into weeks, Emma and Jake continued to navigate their transformed life together, finding a new balance in their relationship. The wellness center was expanding, and Emma's influence in the community grew stronger. People looked to her not just for guidance on physical health but for wisdom on how to live a more balanced, fulfilled life. The center had become a reflection of her journey, a testament to the strength she had found within herself. Jake, now more in tune with Emma's vision, continued to manage the business side of things, but his role had shifted. He no longer saw himself as the leader, instead, he supported Emma's leadership, proud of the woman she had become. One quiet evening, as the two of them were finishing up their work at the center, Emma turned to Jake, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know," she said slowly, "I never thought this would be my life. When I was younger, I thought I'd just get by. But now, I'm living a life I'm proud of." Jake smiled and leaned back in his chair, his eyes soft. "I've seen that transformation," he said. "I've seen you go from someone who was afraid to take up space to someone who commands respect just by being herself. It's incredible." Emma's smile was warm, but there was a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "I still have my doubts sometimes," she admitted, her voice low. "I still wonder if I'm doing enough, if I'm making the right choices. But then I remind myself that it's not about perfection. It's about progress." Jake nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. He had learned the same lesson. It was about showing up every day, doing the best they could, and trusting that the rest would fall into place. "You're doing more than enough," Jake said, his voice steady. "You're not just changing your life. You're changing the lives of so many others." Emma looked at him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and love. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she said softly. "You've been my partner in every way, even when I didn't know I needed you." Jake reached across the table and took her hand, a quiet promise in his touch. "I'll always be here," he said. "We're in this together." The weight of his words hung in the air, not in a heavy way, but in a comforting one. They had come so far, and there was still so much more to look forward to. Emma had found her purpose, and Jake had learned how to truly support her, not by trying to control, but by standing beside her. As they left the center for the night, walking side by side into the evening air, they both felt a sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear, they had each other, and together, they would face whatever came their way. There was no longer any need to wonder if they were enough. They knew they were. As the years went by, Emma and Jake's journey continued to unfold in ways they had never anticipated. The wellness center had grown into a full-fledged success, attracting people from all walks of life, all seeking the same thing, transformation. Emma's passion for helping others had become the cornerstone of her life. She was no longer just the woman who had faced self-doubt and insecurity. She had become the woman who empowered others to embrace their true selves, flaws and all. Jake stood by her, quietly supporting her vision, proud of how far they had both come. But their relationship was no longer just about Emma's success or Jake's support. It was about their shared journey of growth and self-discovery. They had learned that they didn't need to compete for attention or approval. They had learned to stand side by side, each of them shining in their own way. One afternoon, as they sat in their favorite park, enjoying the sunshine, Emma turned to Jake, a thoughtful look on her face. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about everything we've been through. All the struggles, all the changes. And I'm just so grateful for where we are now." Jake smiled, his eyes soft. "Me too," he said quietly. "We've come a long way, and I couldn't have imagined getting here without you." Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth. "We've both grown so much," she said. "I think that's the key, you know? We stopped trying to be perfect and started just being ourselves. And that's when everything changed." Jake nodded, his heart full of admiration. "I used to think I had to control everything," he admitted. "But now I realize that the only thing I needed to control was myself, my own actions, my own mindset." Emma squeezed his hand, her gaze steady. "And I had to learn that I didn't need anyone's approval but my own," she said softly. "It wasn't about proving something to you, or anyone else. It was about proving it to myself." Jake's heart swelled with love as he looked at her. She was everything he had ever wanted, not because she completed him, but because she was already complete. They both were. "We're a team," Jake said quietly. "And we've built something beautiful together." Emma smiled, her eyes shining. "We have," she agreed. "And the best part is, we're still building." They sat there for a while, letting the quiet moment wash over them. The future was uncertain, but they no longer feared it. They had each other, and that was all they needed. As they walked back to their car, side by side, they knew that no matter what life threw their way, they would face it together, stronger than ever before. They had learned the most important lesson, that growth didn't come from perfection. It came from embracing the journey, with all its ups and downs, and knowing that as long as they had each other, they were already enough. It had been several years since Emma and Jake first embarked on their journey of growth, and now, as they stood in their new office at the wellness center, they reflected on how far they had come. The once small center had expanded into a thriving community, a space that not only helped people physically but emotionally and mentally as well. Emma had become a recognized leader in the field, not just for her knowledge, but for her unwavering commitment to authenticity and empowerment. Jake had taken on more responsibility at the center, supporting Emma's vision while learning to embrace his own role without the need to dominate every aspect of their shared life. Together, they had created something special, and yet, neither of them ever forgot how much they had both changed to get here. As they walked through the center, greeting staff and clients, Emma felt a sense of accomplishment, but also of excitement for the future. She had spent so much time building this dream, but it was no longer just about the center. It was about the impact it had on the lives of others, the people they had helped find their own voices. "I'm proud of us," Jake said, his voice filled with a quiet pride as they walked back to their office. "But it's not just about what we've done, it's about who we've become in the process." Emma looked at him, smiling softly. "We've both learned so much," she agreed. "I think the biggest lesson for me has been realizing that I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I've learned to trust myself, to trust the process, and to embrace who I am." Jake nodded, his gaze warm. "And I've learned that true strength isn't about being in control or having all the answers. It's about knowing when to step back and allow the other person to lead. It's about being vulnerable and showing up for each other, no matter what." Emma's heart swelled at his words. They had come so far, but the best part was that they had done it together, supporting each other along the way. They had learned that growth wasn't about reaching some final destination, it was about evolving, both individually and as a team. As they sat down in their office, ready to plan for the next phase of the center's growth, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. She had learned to trust herself, and in doing so, she had found her purpose. And now, with Jake by her side, she was ready for whatever the future had in store. Together, they had built something beautiful, and they knew that the best was yet to come. Years passed, and Emma and Jake's life together was nothing like it had been when they first started. The wellness center had expanded further, becoming a staple in the community, and Emma's reputation as a compassionate leader and advocate for wellness was now well known. She had become more than just a successful entrepreneur, she was a mentor to so many, showing others how to transform their lives just as she had done. Jake was now not just her partner in business, but a true equal, sharing in both the triumphs and challenges. They had both come so far, individually and together. One afternoon, as they sat in their office at the center, going over plans for a new outreach program, Jake looked at Emma, a look of quiet admiration in his eyes. "I've been thinking about how far we've come," he said. "Not just with the center, but with us. It's incredible how much we've changed." Emma smiled, the weight of those words sinking in. "I know," she said softly. "I think about it often. I was so lost back then. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted. And now, I found my purpose." Jake nodded, his voice full of love and respect. "You found more than that. You've built something that will last, something that will continue to help people for years to come. And you've shown me how to be a better person along the way." Emma's heart swelled at his words. "We've both learned so much," she said quietly. "And we've grown in ways I never thought possible. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Jake reached out, taking her hand in his. "We've always been in this together, Emma," he said. "And we always will be." As the evening wore on, they continued to work side by side, the familiar rhythm of their partnership now a natural part of their lives. They had faced countless challenges along the way, but each one had only strengthened their bond. They had learned that true strength came not from controlling everything, but from trusting each other and growing together. And now, as they looked ahead to the future, they knew that no matter what came their way, they would face it together, just as they always had. The best part was that their journey was far from over. They were still growing, still learning, and still discovering new parts of themselves. And they knew that, together, they were unstoppable.